I watched Hardcore for the first time and rewatched American Gigolo for a little bit. Let's call it an add-on. It's a nice double feature, especially since they were released in 1979 and 1980 respectively. Hardcore first, Gigolo followed. Hardcore Gigolo. And as always, I like to see the environment of the film, the surroundings, how it's a time capsule in these movies that actually show a lot of city, real on-location filming. So, of course, that's where a lot of my attention went to. That's always a common theme with me. Start out with the plot of American Gigolo, then we'll get into some comparisons between that and Hardcore and the overlaps that I noticed. And then we'll start talking about that movie on its own. Richard Gere plays the man whore known as Julian K. He's basically a little social climber who bangs wealthy older women in exchange for money. He likes to hang around those types, the upper crust, live a luxurious lifestyle, having previously been a, let's call it a lower rent gigolo in the past. And just to give you some perspective about what age of women we're talking about, one of his clients is literally an actress from Gone with the Wind. Just to show you how ancient that broad is. Now, I've never seen Gone with the Wind, so I don't know what character she plays in that. And sure, American Gigolo is now 44 years after it was released as I'm recording this. And that's a longer time period than between when it was filmed and when Gone with the Wind was released. Still, the point is that he bangs a lot of older women. And honestly, who wouldn't? Sure, I'll throw some shots in an old bag if I get to collect myself some Armani suits and get a lot of money. Why not? I'll do it for free because I'm a hard worker and a true American. And you perverts out there would do the same too. Anyway, Julian. He meets Lauren Hutton's character in a bar with beer, and she's going to become his love interest in the film. She's slightly older, not as old as the Gone with the Wind lady by any stretch of the imagination. Probably 20, 30 years younger. And she's married to a California state senator who catches on to the cheating later on in the film, but not before he gives a political speech at a dinner, which I found funny because he was talking about how America needs to get off of fossil fuels and, really transition into green tech. I don't think he called it that. Renewable energy, maybe. I thought it was pretty funny. And that 50 fucking years, it's just been the same thing on repeat. Like, can we either do this or not? Are you going to get off fossil fuels and are we going to all have solar panels? What is the technology ready? You've been saying that for 50 fucking years. Do something. No, but that was just a nice, that was a historical fact besides the landscape that got me. So Julian, he has, in the early stages, he's with this new lover, but gets called by Bill Duke's character. Veteran actor Bill Duke is in this. And he's a pimp, a liaison of sorts. He wants Julian to do a trick in Palm Springs for some rich guy who's a cuck and wants to see his wife get fucked in front of him by Julian. And I looked this up on IMDb when I was looking up the actors. Apparently, the attractive wife Julian is going to fuck is played by Tom Bosley's wife. Tom Bosley from Happy Days. And good for him for upgrading from Mrs. Cunningham to that when he got the chance to. In real life, he was no fool. He picked a hottie. And then let her get touched on film by Richard Gere. But that exchange is probably, well, two of my favorite pieces of dialogue from this film are in that scene. So my favorite piece of dialogue is when Julian walks in and the wife is waking up because she was asleep. I don't even know if she knew this was going to happen, but he starts messing with her and touching her and shit. And he's like, he's talking about how he's going to get her wet. He's like, my name's Julian. I think you're going to like me a lot. You know how I know that? Because I like you. That dialogue is hilarious. It reminded me of the old Men's Warehouse commercial before they stole his company out from him. You're going to like the way you look. I guarantee it. So that's my favorite piece of dialogue. And then it's a close 1A, 1B situation where the cuck husband is like, it turns out to be a rough trick. Julian didn't know that. And the cuck is like, now slap her. Slap the cuck. Well, we never find out what actually happens, but she gets, the woman gets murdered. She's found murdered, and Julian is to blame at some point, and the cops turn their attention to him. We don't know if it's a setup. It looks like a setup from Bill Duke and other characters, and the husband, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. The rest of the story is Julian trying to prove his innocence and carrying on his affair with Lauren Hutton. I don't really care about the rest of the plot of this movie. I have other things I want to talk about. So there is very much an overlap between these two movies. George C. Scott drives around Los Angeles looking for his daughter or any information about her. But he's coming from very much a fish out of water situation. Meanwhile, Julian in American Gigolo is driving these same streets the following year, but as someone who's going back into the seedier side of his profession. He doesn't want to have to go back into doing low grade or gay tricks for money. As he puts it, I don't want to do any fat. Those are his words, not mine. Don't come after me. Go after 1980s movies, which he doesn't do. He doesn't do any of that F slur shit. But he still has to go back into his old surroundings to try to get himself out of the murder rap or get any evidence to point to who did it. And this whole murder setup is after he tried to go more of an independent route with his man whoring, do the more upscale type of jobs, which is basically, again, escorting and plowing older women. The seedy side of things really highlighted in both these films, and I'm not just talking about busting nuts here, folks. Like most of these old films that I watch, I do always want to see the cities of the time, the landscape, any cultural artifacts I can pick up on. Here we have the late 70s California. We have the adult industry. We have prostitution, the aftermath and hangover of the 1960s. I guess you can still kind of visually see the influence of the 1960s in hardcore, even if that is at the tail end of the 70s. In American Gigolo, you still, of course, have the 70s hangover bleeding into that first year of the 80s. You get some of those first inklings of style changes. The men still have lots of open collars and even some leisure suit type attire by characters. I think Richard Gere bucks that trend, though. He's moved into full-on Armani suits in this, and he drives the black Benz convertible, you know. I think his character made the first shift into the 80s. He's pretty much full-on 80s man at this point. Bill Duke's character is very much 70s style, but he has this apartment, and the one towards the end where Julian knocks him over the balcony and he dies. So that's the murder rap he goes down for real. And the decoration in that apartment is full of darker tones, but the lighting and the glass decor, the glass shelving and shit like that, it all strikes me as very early 80s to me. Kind of a mix between the two decades, that transitional period. It's a lot different than what you would get from a more stereotypical disco style or 70s ugly wallpaper, which is what you get in the early part of hardcore, especially. In his Michigan home, the wallpaper is insane. So these films have the imagery of the late 70s and Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco to an extent at the end. That all really comes through in hardcore. With Gigolo, you get to see some of the same streets in LA at that year and a half later, but lots of driving on the PCH as well and going to Palm Springs for that trick where he does or does not murder that woman. So the cultural artifacts or scenery that I picked up on, what was interesting to me is the sheer number of sex shops and porn theaters that exist at this time. Also those head shops that were totally not selling weed, but giving you all the accoutrement to smoke weed. I think 15 years ago, 20 years ago, none of that type of shit really would have existed. And the film would have looked a lot more alien. But nowadays, with all the weed shops everywhere, I guess it's really not that different. Though I think the griminess today is less about guys skulking around to go beat off in porn theaters. Well, you still have prostitution, of course, and especially in LA. But now you're having to watch homeless drug addicts pull out their cocks while screaming a bunch of schizo nonsense. So the more things change, the more they stay the same or slightly change. I don't know. Maybe I should talk about the plot of Hardcore here then. George C. Scott, he plays a very religious man in Grand Rapids, Michigan. His wife left him sometime before the story begins, but his teenage daughter still lives with him. He's part of a larger and fairly tight-knit religious community. He owns a successful business, and other than being a boring fucking guy and losing his wife, let's just call it what it is. He lost her erectile dysfunction. This is pre-Viagra. I'm calling it. He couldn't get his dick hard. That's why she left. She's a religious woman that needed the cock. Just like the daughter, we find out, needs the cock too. But other than all that, his life's not too bad. It's pretty good existence. Well, that all changes on a church trip to California with her the other kids in the church. His daughter goes missing. She's a senior in high school at this point. Nobody knows what happens to her, other than the fact that she had been seen talking to some older boys. And when he goes to LA, the police aren't really doing shit. They don't know what to do. They're not going to find her. So George C. Scott hires Peter Boyle, who plays a private detective. And months later, after Peter Boyle's basically been spending all the money, not really doing any search, I think it's later in the film when George C. Scott comes to Los Angeles and Peter Boyle is just fucking some porn star who supposedly has a lead or something on the case, but he's just trying to drag it out so he can make more money and get more. Good for him. Peter Boyle is one of my winners for this film. But anyway, he comes back to Michigan first and shows George C. Scott a film in a theater, and it's a pornography film, and his daughter's in it, and she's doing porn now. She's getting digged down by two different guys. And I'm sure you've seen the meme of yelling, turn it off, oh my God, while he's watching his daughter get fucking railed out. So, of course, George C. Scott's like, oh, my daughter's a nice girl. She wouldn't do any of this. He thinks his daughter's been kidnapped and basically sold into sex or just forced into the porn business. So, as such, Mr. George goes and decides he's going to head out to LA and try to track down his daughter himself, since no one else can seem to do the fucking job. So at first, he tries, as his normal conservative self, to go to all the porn shops and ask prostitutes whether or not they've seen his missing daughter. And they're all like, are you a cop? And the prostitute's like, do you want me to fuck you or what? Get out of here. And they throw him out. And he can't seem to get any information. So that's when he comes up with the idea. He's going to pose as a porn producer. He ends up befriending a prostitute / porn star named Nikki. And he'll end up beating information out of a porn star named Jism Jim during his fake casting call. So as a porn producer, he holds a fake casting call in order to find the guy on the film, one of the guys on the film who's fucking his daughter. And Jism Jim is that guy. And he's like, hey man, I'm not working with that bitch anymore. She's weird, and I think she like bit his dick or something during the shooting. George C. Scott beats the shit out of Jism Jim and gets the information and begins to track down his daughter. In the whole movie, the culmination, the ending, is utterly insane to me. It's such a standard example of horror logic, which I told you was going to be a theme where we're going to pick on women a bit in this review. I'm sorry, I'll make fun of men next time or sometime in the future, I promise. And I know Paul Schrader didn't want to do that ending. Kristen was apparently supposed to die in an unrelated car accident, and then Nikki, the prostitute, would get to have her father figure in Jake, and they would go back to Michigan together or something. Like, this ending is a shoehorn scene where he tracks down the evil Rattan, the porn producer, who his daughter's been with, and his daughter runs away from him. And then there's a scene with Kristen, his daughter, who says she ran away and they never made her do anything. So he's been looking for her the whole time and she just ran away. Like she wanted to get cream by two guys because you never cared, Dad. That's why I ran away, to hang out with a guy who produces snuff films, either real films or very realistic looking movies of people realistic looking films of people getting murdered for sexual pleasure. And that's who she ran away to hang out with because you didn't give her enough attention. Unreal. So this girl was about to graduate high school. How many months? A couple months, maybe a whole school year. I don't know. She was apparently a virgin, according to the conversation she had earlier with her cousin earlier in the film. So instead of just chilling for a year, moving out on your own, going to college, getting a job, whatever, she goes and does porn in California and basically dating a guy who produces the most illegal types of shit, the most illegal types of porn imaginable. Films and, a little younger films if we're going to put it politely. And then after all this, tells George C. Scott to go away. But then 10 seconds later, she's like, never mind, I'll come back home with you. And then they just go back to Grand Rapids together. That is a hell of an escalation, though. Okay, so your dad was kind of distant and your parents got divorced and you're almost done. You're almost an adult yourself. And that's the path you take? That's the rebellion you do? Fucking Kristen. Kristen's just out here redlining her life completely. Where do you even go from there? You get tag teamed in the one film they showed. God knows how many others she did. How much further she went. So fathers, don't let your daughters catch herpes while doing a 4 or 5 month stint in the industry. I kind of get it though. Nobody seemed to really give a fuck that she was missing. Her cousin, her aunt, Dick Sargent, the brother-in-law. He didn't seem concerned that Kristen was gone. And no one in the town in Grand Rapids seemed to have an understanding of a father doing whatever it takes to find his daughter. You don't get that shit? Like Dick Sargent came to LA. He's like, Jake, you got to get this up. You got to come home. I was like, when he's pretty much got some evidence already that he knows where, at least has connections to where his daughter might be, people that know where she is, then Dick Sargent trying to throw water on that. And that's the film Hardcore.